What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Let's Talk MMA podcast. It's been a glorious week. The sun is out, the birds are chirping, the weather is great. Rejoice, there must have been a Charles Oliveira win somewhere, as well as an Alex Pereira win, and a Tony Ferguson win, Jiri Prochazka, and a Volkanovski win. It's just been a satisfying year. It's awesome, man, and that Brazil card was pretty good. There's not a lot of substance for every fight, but one of the most confusing parts of the card was how much the odds makers counted Figueiredo out. And I think it was because of the uncertainty of his injury, but then the odds should have reflected the uncertainty by not making him a plus 265 underdog, dude. And I knew he was healthy from simply watching the pre-fight workout. He moved well and landed an imperfect handspring. So imperfect that it looked like he could have blown his knees out. And it didn't, so he was fine for the fight. Deiveson Figueiredo had to find a way around the reach of Luffy. Montel Jackson has a 75.5-inch reach, resembling a welterweight, and Deiveson still beat him. It was a close fight, though. And one of the judges actually gave Montel the first round, not the second. If there was any other round that Montel could have won, it would have been the second. But they gave him the first, even though Figueiredo clearly won that round, and it wasn't that close. And funny enough, it was a Brazilian judge, Fabio Alves, gave Montel Jackson the first round. I don't know, he might have some sort of like beef with Deiveson or something. They might go way back. I don't know, Deiveson probably like butchered his haircut or something. Yoel Alvarez defeated Vicente Luque, and clearly Alvarez was winning. I thought he would finish him. I thought Luque would have no moments, honestly, but he landed a few shots here and there. I don't know if it's because Alvarez just doesn't have respectable power or Luque's durability somehow recovered. But Luque shooting that takedown in the third round was so convincing that he should retire, because he was down 2 rounds and he got 10-8 in the second for shooting a takedown. Almost 2 minutes into the third round, he decides to shoot another takedown. Had no urgency to finish. And a Luque without urgency is not Luque. Vintage Luque would have went for the knockout. This is clearly not the same fighter. And I hope he retires soon, dude. He's taking way too much head trauma. And the whole eye poke incident shows why we have the best referees in sports. So Alvarez hit Luque in the eye with a left hook. It was understandably mistaken for an eye poke. It was a fast shot and it seemed like he may have poked him in the eye, but on the replay, his fingers are not extended and therefore not an eye poke. Well, from observing the replay, the referee decided to wave off the fight, which would have been a first round finish for Yoel Alvarez, but he took it back. We've seen this before on another recent card. Referees all of a sudden can recall their stoppage. It's really good to know that referees can just all of a sudden do that. Okay, so he retracts that, brings in a doctor to check on Luque, which he shouldn't be doing, but okay, giving Luque time to recover, and then resumes the fight. In the third round, Alvarez had an inverted triangle for like 3 minutes straight and didn't do much with it. It's a tricky one because, yes, he has an inverted triangle, but it's not choking him. The leg was across the face, so there sort of wasn't a real submission there. But the referee just watched and allowed the fight to end in that position. Did they grab some random guy from the audience to ref this fight? Crazy, dude. Mario Pinto dominated Jonathan Janice. I called this fight almost perfectly. I got him by a second round knockout, but I thought he was going to finish him in the stand-up. Although I knew Pinto was going to shoot takedowns and take advantage of Janice's non-existent grappling skills. The guy did not improve at all from the Marcin Tybura fight. I thought Pinto was going to score the knockout from the stand-up, but second round finished with a hilarious post-fight interview. So we have an undefeated heavyweight with some personality. Definitely need more of those. And then we go to some more profound officiating. When Con Ofli fence grabbed his way to a win, I mean, this is some of the most blatant cheating I've ever seen. Submitting Ricardo Ramos in the first round, he grabbed the fence multiple times, from defending the leg lock submissions to adjusting his position on top, and had his toes in the fence when he had his back, which gives him reinforcement to hold himself up on the position because Ramos was standing up too. Amazing refereeing from Mark Goddard. And then Michael Aswell defeated Lucas Almeida. And speaking of officiating, how did the doctors clear Lucas Almeida to fight? The guy's hand was literally a balloon. His hand was a balloon, dude. Almeida's hand was so swollen. It was shining like Joe Rogan's head. Insane. And the fact that he had to rely on his left hand opened up the right for Aswell, beating the looping punch with a straight. And I thought Almeida had a chance too, dude. Vitor Petrino on a live Thomas Peterson. That was a bad knockout, dude. Swift combination on the disengagement. Right hand into a left hook. Colded him. The heavyweight move was definitely a smart one for him because His cardio deficiency still exists, but that's the same for many heavyweights, so he isn't going to be at a natural disadvantage in the heavyweight division. And then Bia Mesquita dominated Irina Alexeyeva. Huge mismatch, and the betting odds were definitely correct on this one, and her BJJ accolades transitioned very well for this fight specifically. We'll see what the other ones, but I foresee her defeating some, I don't want to say high level, because bantamweight doesn't have many high level fighters, or at least some good fighters there. I think she could destroy some of them. But she secured easy takedowns in Arena, seamlessly passed into the full mount. And she's so thick, dude. The Arena could not budge her off at all. She gift wrapped at Arena, raining down elbows. Then she submitted her in the second round pretty easily with a rear naked choke. Her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is absolutely top notch, and we'll see how far she goes in this division. And then Simon Oliveira lost to Luan Lacerda. The guy was like trying to get cut. He was on a 3-fight loss streak. Missed weight by 8 pounds. Yeah, the guy was 144 pounds for a 135-pound fight. With a pound allowance, 136, he was 8 pounds heavier, dude. And now he's on a 4-fight loss streak, winless in the UFC. I even said in the prediction video, I don't know how this guy's in the UFC. And that goes for a lot of other fighters too. The roster is so bloated, it needs some trimming, for sure. Because they have more Simon Oliveiras in there. But ultimately, it was a pretty good card. I gave the card like a 7 or 8 on paper, but it performed like a 6 out of 10. The main event was great. Some other stellar performances, but I wish the co-main event was more exciting and without all the controversies. Like Montel Jackson winning the first round on one of the scorecards, Con Ofli cheating to win, and then Lucas Almeida fighting with a broken hand, but then again, TJ Dillashaw fought with one working arm, and Michael Bisping fought with one eye, so I guess this one doesn't really stack up too much. MMA has the best officiating for fights, dude. You can win with eye pokes, low blows get no point deductions. You can grab the fence to defend against submissions and get better positions. It's like a whole new sport. But going from that to the Alex Pereira performance, because man, that is still so absurd, the run that guy's on. Alex is awesome. The achievements are quite unparalleled, from the amount of title wins that he's getting across specifically 2 divisions to the amount of champions that he's defeated and the total undefeated streak that he has snapped. A total of a 55 undefeated streak across opponents. Yo, I doubted him going into the Ankalaev fight, but true greatness like that deserves appreciation. And I'm glad he's not washed. I'm glad he's still in prime form and might even be better than ever. Way exceeded my expectations. I thought Ankalaev was going to win, but he certainly did not. I thought Ankalaev's counter-striking was going to be very effective, but it wasn't. Alex is, at this point, I would say at the very least, top 3 greatest light heavyweights of all time. But does he get placed above Daniel Cormier? DC is extremely underrated. Interesting, but I would definitely put him like top 10 of all time across all weight classes. For what he's been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time is just legendary stuff, dude. The guy returned to MMA 5 years ago, and he's already a UFC 2-weight world champion, a 2-time light heavyweight champion, and has 7 wins against champions. Ankalaev, Jiri twice, Hill, Blachowicz, Adesanya, and Strickland. He's somewhere in the top 10 for sure. Honestly, even above that, the guy is so inspiring. His defeating of alcoholism is what set the path for him to become one of the greatest combat sports athletes ever. Dude, unknowingly at the time, he walked into a world that he would one day conquer. All for the purpose of kicking a vice that was destructive to him, right? He wasn't drinking normally. He was apparently like intoxicated all the time, but eventually became one of the greatest glory kickboxers of all time, and now one of the greatest MMA fighters of all time, conquering 2 different sports. Now, it is without to be said, he is genetically gifted. I mean, you can't train for that sort of power. He's also huge, able to make weight at 185 pounds, which was always confusing. And now in hindsight, Alex telling Ankalaev to his face that he's not returning to the title shop was the ultimate locked-in moment, but he had to pull it off to make it actually correlate well. It sort of reminded me of like Fedor Emelianenko and how he used to convince himself to lock in on the moment as well. He would envision all of his opponents as someone who's trying to send him back to poverty. And in his words, he would state that his opponent, quote, has to be eliminated, unquote. Like there is no second option. There is no defeat in mind. But Alex took it even a step further. With victory not being satisfying enough, he said that it was a must to knock Ankalaev out. In the fighting game, delusion is a very powerful weapon. It could be self-harming or it could be used to destroy their opponent, just like Alex did. Of course, he was never going to the title shop, but deluding himself enough to believe that it's possible was enough for him to intensely focus on this fight He understood that he was prosperous at the time, but he had to put himself in that mental state to get the best possible effort out of himself. And also, apparently, Alex Pereira, in preparation for the fight, locked himself in the gym for 2 months, putting the utmost focus in defeating Ankalaev. That may have been the scariest version of Alex Pereira ever, this infuriated Alex Pereira, but focusing that energy in a cerebral approach. But do you know which version might be even scarier than that? 240-pound heavyweight Alex Pereira, if he ever makes that transition, would be insane. Now, I would love to see him fight Ulberg and just clean out the division, but if he wants to vacate and move up to heavyweight, that'd be awesome as well. He's probably not going to fight that much longer. I mean, he's already accomplished so much. Like, if he becomes a triple champion, what is there left to do? But could Ankalaev get a rematch? I don't think so, and neither does Glover. As Bruce Buffer was announcing the winner, it looked like Glover was telling the Ankalaev camp that there will not be a trilogy after that. How can there be? The first fight was a loss, but it was very close. But the second fight was the easiest win in Alex's entire career. I think Ankalaev has to build himself up again if he ever wants to fight Alex, but I don't foresee it. I don't think they ever fight again because Alex's goals lie somewhere else now. In the heavyweight division, he talked about this. I really wonder how Alex would perform at heavyweight because with the newfound confidence of him defending all of Ankalaev's takedowns, I think it really gives him a chance to thrive at heavyweight. Like, can you imagine he stops all of Tom Aspinall's takedowns? Not to say that Ankalaev is a better or more effective wrestler. Tom's big and fast, very athletic, and a decent wrestler too. Just imagining if Alex was able to stop the takedowns and just knocked him out. The scenes would be otherworldly. Like, Alex would confirm that he was the main character this whole time. If you see it from like a narrative standpoint, it does seem like he is the main character. He has all the cool rivals, but he's always like a step ahead. He's always seeking the next big goal. He possibly could become the first ever triple champion. So if he defeats Tom Aspinall or something, I mean, I'm calling him the GOAT. There's always going to be the disagreement that, you know, the heavier divisions just aren't as skilled, so Alex cannot be the GOAT or whatever. But there is some validity to that, but I just don't like to discredit the heavier guys like that. Especially one who is achieving so much in such short time. Like, it hasn't even been 4 years since Alex made his UFC debut. And he's a double champion, has 7 wins against other champions. 8 out of his 12 fights have been for the title. 8 of his 10 wins are by knockout. And only 2 of those wins went into the championship rounds while defeating great opponents. So if he defeats Tom Aspinall, he's my GOAT. But it doesn't seem like he's that interested in Tom. He spoke to Dana about aspiring to fight Jon Jones. Now that is interesting and unexpected. I thought he'd rather fight Tom Aspinall, but perhaps he's looking for the big legacy and money fight. And I don't know if he can win. I don't know. His takedown defense looked stellar against Ankalaev, but Ankalaev does not wrestle like Jon Jones. He doesn't have the same fight IQ. Jon Jones is one of the best fighters we've ever seen. But I think Alex stands a chance, for sure. If he could kick out the legs, Jones doesn't have great leg kick defense. He tends to reach down at the leg kicks, which could open up more headshots for Alex. But man, if Alex can defend the takedowns, he wins that handily. It wouldn't even be a fight. But I don't know. That's a tough one, though. I don't want to see it, man. I want to see him fight Tom Aspinall, dude. Enough with Jon Jones. The guy's retired. He officially returned, but he's retired, man. He just wants a big money fight, and then he's going to bounce once again. And now that Alex is sharing his preference to fight Jones, it's going to entice him, right? Jones is going to call him out, and they're probably going to make the fight, but what do you do with the title at that point? We're fresh off Alex winning the belt again. Does he seriously vacate it, or do they allow him to hold on to it? They can't do that. Enough with the champions looking to jump weight classes while holding their belt hostage. Carlos Ulberg is the #1 contender and he deserves the fight for a belt. Jiri Prochazka is right there in line as well. And if Alex decides to vacate it, then they're going to do Ulberg versus Jiri for the vacant belt, and I'm all up for that. I would love to see that. That would be an insane fight, dude. I still think stylistically, Ulberg's a tough fight for Jiri, but that's true with every Jiri fight. Every fight is supposed to be tough for him. Something's given this guy power to just withstand the most concussive blows possible. It doesn't make any sense. So I don't know, as an early pick, I might just go with Jiri because you sort of just have to, and he's going to have 5 rounds to turn the tides instead of 3. Yeah, I don't know if Ulberg has much of a chance in a 5-round fight. In 3 rounds, he could probably run away to a decision, but not for 5. And we've seen the last time Ulberg had to deal with someone who tanked his shots and brawled with him. Usually when a sniper is not able to pick off his opponent with 1 shot, they tend to crumble under the pressure. The chaos that I think Jiri will bring might overwhelm Carlos Ulberg as well. But don't get me wrong, man. Yuri's going to get hit by some precise shots, but I foresee him walking through those, as usual. So we'll see. Is Ulberg destined to be the next dominant force at light heavyweight, or will he get Jiri'd? Just like everyone besides Alex gets Jiri'd. And yo, I must have watched the Jiri Prochazka reaction like a million times. It was just so cinematic. Jiri is just passion personified. The guy lives for combat and honor. But Jiri actually clarified as to why he was crying, and it's so anime, bro. He said he was crying because he realized a third chance to defeat Alex Pereira. This is like some Goku versus Vegeta type of rivalry, man. Jiri was crying tears of joy because he gets to fight Alex again, or at least in his mind. Even with 2 knockout losses to Alex, this guy is still yearning at the opportunity to fight him. An opportunity that moved him so much emotionally that it caused him to cry. Dude, I love Jiri, man. He's awesome. He's just like an eccentric warrior soul who wandered to the modern time. Bro belongs with the Vikings or the samurais. This guy is like incongruent with our era, living in the wilderness, punching trees, and trains with a literal sword for unarmed combat. Yuri's a one of a kind, man. I love this guy. Too pure for this world. The guy's salt of the earth. But man, I definitely hope Alex fights Tom and not Jones. The Tom fight is way more interesting because both of them are in their prime and he can win a heavyweight title. If there's no belt there fighting Jones, so I want to see if he can actually accomplish that seemingly impossible triple champ status because he is the closest to achieving it. And I think defeating Tom right now is bigger for his legacy than beating a just retired post-prime heavyweight John Jones. Tom Aspinall's in his prime. He's the reigning champion. That's the guy to beat. And the 3-division champion is the goal to meet. Wait, that rhymed. So you know it's true. It's poetic. This is the fight to make. Forget about John Jones. Tom Aspinall versus Alex Pereira is the fight. Unless he wants to be active enough and fight Ulberg at the beginning of next year and then fights Tom at the White House event. Yo, that could be the move, solidifying his GOAT status. The stats are there, the wins are there. The guy is having an historic run, and he's not even done. He has just started. No, okay, let's not exaggerate, but he has only begun. No, okay. Dude, he has that one big career move left. He's got to fight Tom Aspinall. I want to see greatness. I want to see if we can establish a new GOAT here, because so far it's been a fight between John Jones and GSP. This is truly the era of the Alexes. Alex Pereira, Alex Volkanovski, and Alex Pantoja. Current champions on some historic runs. So many of the champions seem unbeatable at this point. Tom is unbeatable. Alex is essentially proven to be unbeatable when he's healthy. Hamza seems unbeatable. Ilia, Merab, and Pantoja. We got the Avengers as champions right now. Probably the most skilled lineup ever. If their focus is there, they can exceed some of the former champions' reigns. Now, I don't know about Hamza exceeding Anderson and JDM exceeding GSP and stuff, but like they can rack up title defenses. I don't know about JDM. JDM is not one of the unbeatable guys. I don't think there is a welterweight that is unbeatable. I think that belt is going to be exchanging hands unless Islam proves to be truly on a different level than all of them. But I don't know. I think many of those fights could be tough for him. And for the first time since 2018, there are currently no UFC champions from Dagestan. The Dagestanis were doing very well before. They had the sambo skills, they had like a head start with their training, and it was of course going to make them seem dominant in the UFC until the fighters experience fighting them. Then they start making adjustments and they start improving, and now we're seeing Merab beat Umar and Alex beat Ankalaev and Paul Hughes giving Usman 2 great fights, you know? We'll see what JDM could do against Islam. Now, does that mean that Islam's going to lose? Not necessarily, but you could definitely see the other UFC fighters gaining ground on them. It's a great development. Oh, and Ilia Topuria apparently just broke up with his wife, and that's not great news. Yeah, it was nice knowing you, Justin Gaethje. Thank you for all the great fights. This is about to happen to him again, isn't it? Bro's about to fight a heartbroken Spaniard who so happens to be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Gaethje's execution might be in January, and Dana says is going to be massive, and they're prioritizing that one. If Ilia vs. Gaethje is in fact headlining it, it means that Dana is trying to set this precedent by hitting a home run with the first big Paramount card. And hopefully that becomes consistent with all the big cards. And then he says his priority will be the UFC White House event, focusing on making it the greatest UFC card of all time. If Alex and Jiri are not on that card, then it cannot be the greatest of all time. It is a must to have them both on it. And some pretty cool fights got announced. I didn't get to speak about them, but Arman Tsaruykan versus Dan Hooker, Belal Muhammad versus Ian Garry, oddly, Mytkybek Orolbai versus Jack Hermansson, and it's all in the same Qatar event. And you already know, if they go to the Middle East, it's going to be a stacked card, and a fight night too. So glad to see Arman is actually fighting, and Dan Hooker was the only one who was willing to fight him. Arman's been calling out Paddy Pimblett. He was calling out Ilia Topuria. He was calling out everybody besides Mateusz Gamrot. But this is much better. He's fighting the guy who beat Gamrot. And he's most likely going to win, right? This is a horrible stylistic matchup for Dan Hooker. With a win here, hopefully, he gets that title shot afterward. I want to see the best versus the best. Ilia versus Arman is that. Not much to say about the matchup itself. I mean, it's pretty clear-cut. Hooker's wrestling defense has improved, but not to the level of defending Arman's. Arman's also a decent striker. He can commit with some respectable power. He's very dexterous with his kicks. I think Arman's going to dominate. Hooker's also been out for a long time, so he doesn't even have that advantage. I mean, most lightweights would have an activity advantage against Arman. Hooker doesn't really have that, and hopefully they don't fight each other prior or after the contest, as Arman said that he's prepared to do so, and he brought brothers with him. Hooker seemed undeterred from hearing that, but hopefully nothing like that happens. You know, Arman's confronted Bobby Green before and slapped him before UFC 300, so he definitely is one to confront anyone that he believes has disrespected him. Arman is so stupid for that, dude. You have an opportunity to fight the guy for 5 rounds by yourself. Hopefully Arman just stays cool and the UFC keeps them separated backstage. And then Belal versus Garry, I think, is a much more competitive fight. Ian Garry's grappling is solid. His striking is superior, I think. He's the taller, longer guy. He can keep him at range and put together combinations. Belal has to abandon the Canelo hands. Let's not do that this time. Wrestle with him. If he uses Canelo hands, Ian Garry's going to look like Crawford. But I'm curious to see if Belal's wrestling would be overwhelming for Garry. Should be interesting. Ian Garry hasn't fought too many high-level wrestlers, and this is definitely going to be a step up for him in that skill alone. Like, Shavkat's a good grappler, but he's not the same wrestler that Belal is. It's a very different stylistic matchup. But crazy enough, Ian Garry said that he was expecting to fight Sean Brady. Both of them accepted the fight, according to Garry, but it was the UFC that wanted to navigate to a different direction. So they gave him Belal Muhammad, and they gave Sean Brady Michael Morales. That is quite confusing. Brady beat the #1 contender at the time on short notice, so he did the UFC a favor, and he submitted him as well. It was an excellent performance. To give him #7 Michael Morales, this undefeated surging monster, it's almost like they want to get Brady out of the way too, for some reason. I mean, I think Brady's one of the best welterweights in the world. And I also think he defeats Morales, but this matchmaking doesn't make any sense. Because now, if, let's say, Garry beats Belal and Brady beats Morales, now who you give a title shot to? I would still give it to Brady. With the whole MMA math, you know, the UFC might just go with Garry because Belal beat Brady, Garry beat Belal, Garry stepped up on short notice to fight Shavkat, but then again, Brady stepped up on short notice to fight Leon, so they both did the UFC a favor. But the difference is one of them won and the other lost. So it is what it is, and Brady said that he'll fight everybody. He said eventually he's going to have to face all the best, so why wait for it? You know, just fight Morales now. It's actually intelligent to fight Morales now than later in his prime. But he has the same mentality that Max Holloway had when he was rising up at featherweight. Holloway said the exact same thing. I'm going to fight everybody regardless, so might as well start now before he becomes champion. It's an interesting fight because Morales is powerful and strong and all that, but Brady's strong as well, and he's a lot more technical everywhere. I think he's even more technical in the stand-up. Morales is an adequate grappler, but not on Brady's level, bro. He is not on Brady's level at all. Very few are. So I think Brady's going to perform once again, and hopefully good enough to get a title shot. Orolbai and Hermansson. So Hermansson's moving down to welterweight, which is quite interesting. I mean, he never seemed small for middleweight, so I'm actually surprised if he could even make it to welterweight. But for his first fight being Orolbai, it's going to be quite dangerous, man. Orolbai is a physical fighter, relying on his power and strength, and he does have a well-roundedness to him. And if Hermansson is draining himself too much, that could be the biggest hurdle for him. I don't want to see a brittle Hermansson out there, man. He's going to get crushed. If he can make the weight healthy enough, I think he should do pretty well. Tagir Ulanbekov versus Kyoji Horiguchi is getting rescheduled on that card as well. I'm just curious to see if Horiguchi has what it takes in today's era to become one of the top flyweights. Pantoja needs new opponents. If he could beat Joshua Van, that is. We will see. And then Spivak versus Gaziev, the polar bear versus the goat. It's a heavyweight fight for sure. Oh, Sean Strickland says that he wants to fight Anthony Hernandez. I want to fight someone like Fluffy. He puts me in title contention. He's like the American Chimaev. I want to fight Chimaev. I'm the only one that beats Chimaev. He knows this. His camp knows this. Okay. You know, it's great that he wants to fight Fluffy. I think it's a solid call out and should be an interesting fight. Strickland has great get-ups and excellent cardio, so Fluffy's top control will be tested, but perhaps he tackles the fight like Khabib used to. When opponents constantly stood up, he would just focus on keep taking them down for the entire fight, but Strickland might fight off the hands well to break the grip. I think Strickland is clearly the better boxer, but Does he have the punching power to hold off that freight train from constantly running him over at every disengaging reset from the takedowns? I don't think so. I believe Fluffy wins, but by decision. Unless Strickland got a lot better. And let's go to the questions, and we're going to start with Sushant Kop. Hey bro, pronunciation of my name is Sushant, not Sushanti. Su and Shant are together. Thank you so much. I appreciate the correction. I've never heard of the name. But first question, who is that fighter in your opinion who is not yet a champion now, but can become a two-weight division champion in the future? Before Hamza won the belt, I would have picked him as the answer, but the first guy that comes to mind is Sean Brady, but I don't think he'd become a two-weight world champion, so I would say none of them, but if I have to pick a fighter, it would be Brady. Second question, which UFC rivalry had the best trash talk ever? I guess you can't go wrong with Conor and Nate. Another one was DC and Jones. DC and Jones was real. They weren't just trying to build up a fight, and you can sense it during it. And then third question, how will Pereira do against the top 10 heavyweights? And if the fight against Aspinall did happen, how does he beat him? So, Marcin Tybura destroyed. Ante Dalia, I think he beats him as well, but that would be an interesting fight. Derek Lewis doesn't even land a punch. Sergey Spivak gets destroyed. He beats Waldo. I don't think Waldo could take him down. Just not proficient enough on the ground. He's more of a striker who can wrestle against guys who have never wrestled in their entire lives, like Rebeles Despain. Gelton Almeida. I'm going to go with Alex. I believe in his ability to get up from the bottom. Curtis Blades. If we're able to plug a controller into Blades, then I would pick Blades. But there have been so many fights where he refused to shoot for like half the first round and he gets knocked out for it. So with Curtis Blades' fight IQ, I would probably pick Alex to beat him. Sergey Pavlovich, I would go with Alex, just a much better striker. And if you don't brawl with Pavlovich, he tends not to be as efficient with the striking. Alexander Volkov, that would be a good fight, but I think Alex would tenderize his legs, opening up the knockout shot later. Cyril Gane, that would be an interesting one, but the leg kicks would do Cyril Gane in, chopping out his base, making the heavyweight a lot more plotting for the knockout shot. And then Tom Aspinall, I gotta go with Tom. He's big, strong, well-rounded. I think the power of those takedowns would be too overwhelming for Alex to defend. Tom is a physical specimen. If I remember correctly, he's like at 11% body fat while being in the 250s. The guy's a monster, dude. Keep up the good work, brother. Thank you so much for the question, Sushant. And then we go to Nano Peach. Hey, Weasel, with Alex most likely going to heavyweight, how does he do against John, Aspinall, and Gane? So I covered Aspinall and Gane. I can see him being John if he's washed. And honestly, if it's the same version that fought Stipe. He looks slow out there. He never had great leg kicking defense, and I think a few leg kicks on those skinny, thin chicken legs would either force desperate takedowns and or allow Alex to follow up with a big uppercut or something like that as John Jones becomes frantic with his wrestling. But if it's anywhere near a prime John Jones, then of course I think he beats Alex. Ilia vs. Gaethje breakdown. January card most likely, yeah. So we knew this fight is most likely going to happen, especially now that Arman's fighting Hooker. And all jokes aside, I do think Gaethje presents different issues that Ilia's fought against so far. I mean, nobody kicks like Justin Gaethje. I do think Gaethje can work off the leg kicks well. He's the best leg kicker Ilia's probably ever going to fight. He's tough, he hits hard. He has that same berserker mentality, you know? He's going to march forward into Ilia or he moves away. If his approach is to be evasive, the leg kicks are just not going to work the same. Ilia's going to cut him off, trap him against the fence, and knock him dead. It should be an interesting fight, honestly. I think a lot of people are underestimating Gaethje. There are some effective techniques that he can work with better than others, notably the leg kicks. Leg kicks are effective against Ilia, man. It's a natural counter to his style. The way he stands, the way he throws punches. His defense is usually going to be revolved around either grabbing the kick or stepping away from them. The lead heavy stance is quite vulnerable to leg kicks, but this is going to be the first time Ilia's going to have to especially focus on defending leg kicks. And I wonder if he makes some sort of special adjustment to it. Centers his stance instead of leaning forward. I wonder. Should be interesting. Ilia's a smart fighter. But yeah, in Ilia's methods of victory here, I think it goes one of two ways. And it depends on how Justin Gaethje approaches. If Gaethje wants to meet Ilia in the fire, he's going to get KO'd very quickly. Either when he's throwing a punch, Ilia ducks under it and just blasts to his jaw with a right overhand, ends the fight instantly off of that. Or Gaethje's more elusive with his kicking style, but that eventually leads to him getting cut off on the fence, and Ilia causes him to explode like the Volkanovski fight. Those are the two ways I see Ilia defeating him. There is a possibility he takes him down and submits him. That's honestly the path of least resistance, because Gaethje has no jiu-jitsu, which is so insane. Like, dude, after all of these years, you would think that Gaethje has worked on his Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but he is so confident in his takedown defense. he has completely neglected developing his jiu-jitsu skills to at least get up from the bottom, right? In his last fight against Fiziev, he got caught into an inverted triangle against a Muay Thai striker. Dude, Ilia would strangle him on the ground if he wants to attack that way, so scratch the 2 methods. Ilia has a third, takes him down and submits him easily. That would make the fight uncompetitive. And then your next question, how does Zalal do against the top 5? Aljamain Sterling. I think he beats Sterling. He's well-rounded enough. I think he would keep his distance enough to outstrike him and focus on just defending the takedowns, ultimately winning a rather boring decision. Aljamain could probably get a few takedowns, but I think Zalal would fight pretty well off his back to stand up. Against Lerone Murphy, it'd probably be the most boring fight of all time. It might be a staring contest, a leg-kicking festival, but I would go with Zalal in this one because I think he's a better grappler. If he can switch up the fight, shoot some takedowns, that would be the difference maker, I believe. Yair Rodriguez, I think Zalal beats him by taking him down and submitting him. Yair's grappling is still somewhat of a vulnerability, and I think Zalal would capitalize. Diego Lopez, I would go Diego. I believe he's the longer fighter, if not has like the same reach. Zalal will have to be perfect for 25 minutes. It would most likely be a 5-rounder. He would not outgrapple Lopez. So the stick at distance, point fighting with him for 25 minutes, there's no way he doesn't get caught. Because sometimes Zalal keeps his chin up in the air, but he's been very effective against these shorter fighters on evading their big shots. The dynamic is very different against a tall and long one-punch knockout artist like Diego Lopez, who can be ultra aggressive. And as we saw against John Silva, can pull out these unconventional techniques out of nowhere. So I would go with the killer instinct of Diego Lopez and Zalal not be able to point fight him successfully for 25 minutes. Now against Movsar Evloev, I think Zalal would win. I think he would evade most of the takedowns, maybe gets taken down a few times, but spends most of the fight outstriking Evloev, pot shots him for most of it. And then Alexander Volkanovski. I would go with Volk. I don't think he gets outgrappled. I think he's a better striker. He could play the distance game even as a shorter fighter. He's great against leg kicks and throwing them. Somewhat of a master of leg kicks, if you will. That speedy jab would be so effective, especially as Zalal is standing up straight and not really slipping the shots too much. He relies more on his footwork than he does head movement, and I think Volk's speed would surprise him. So I would pick Volkanovski, mainly just outstriking him for the most part, and Zalal just trying to make several adjustments in an attempt to win, but most of them not working successfully against Volk. And then your next question, how does Jiri versus Ulberg go, knowing Jiri's ability to come back? So I spoke about this before. I think Jiri would win in Jiri fashion. He would tank his shots, come out in the 3rd round, and overwhelm Ulberg just like Kennedy Nezeshkowu did, but at a higher level. Veronica Hardy seems small for 125. Would you suggest for her to go down? Because the takedown that got her down felt like Brogan just outmuscled her. How does she do in both divisions? Yeah, she definitely needs to make that move. She's way too small for a flyweight, and she doesn't even look big for a strawweight. Like, Jean-Wei Li looks bigger than her. And yeah, Brogan Walker was literally outmuscling her. This has happened a few times throughout her career. I think she should cut down. And as always, thank you. No problem, man, and thank you so much for the question. And then we go to John Jordan. I'm sure most are generally aware of precision versus power, but can you talk a little bit about how Alex is consistently sending people to the shadow realm with what often seem like short shots and glancing blows when compared to the big shots that guys like Jiri walk through? Is it just one or two things or a multitude? Do things like bone density factor in to KO ability? Thanks, brother. No problem, man. Some guys excel with both. They have the power and they have the precision. Alex is one of those anomalies. In MMA, I mean, it's because he came from kickboxing, he was able to improve that precision throughout his career while having God-gifted power. You can develop power, but it's generally through the form of your punches and just getting in shape, right? But there's a limit. There's not an exponential growth in power, usually. And if there ever is an example of it, it generally means that they're learning how to strike, or they take steroids. As you develop the form of your striking, it allows your body to naturally transition that power through with the technique. So for an example, if someone throws a right straight, but it's grotesque in form, like the ugliest punch you've ever seen, the power doesn't generate through optimally. But if they correct their technique, then the power transfers through their entire body smoothly. That's generally what happens. So like Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson's a great example of this. In the beginning of his career, he was winning by decisions routinely. Like it was just a regular thing for him, but he always had this raw power. It wasn't until he developed his striking to where he was able to actually utilize it. And man, was he utilizing it. The guy had some of the most extraordinary power we've ever seen in the sport. It is true for all fighters. If they just improve their form and get in peak shape, they're going to punch harder, generally, right? Now with Alex Pereira, he did that in kickboxing. He was perfecting his technique, and his power is higher than everybody else's. You are born with that sort of power. Dan Henderson, Alex Pereira, Francis Ngannou, these guys are born with that power. That cannot be taught. It's such shattering power that even short shots, like the way Alex knocked out Jiri in the first fight, bro, that left shovel hook didn't even follow through halfway, and it dropped Jiri Prochazka, the guy that Khalil Roundtree could not even hurt with full bludgeoning attacks. And what about in the second fight at the end of the first round when he dropped Jiri with the step away left hook? That wasn't a full power shot. He was hopping away from him and didn't rotate much for the punch and still dropped him. So yes, I believe Alex excels in both precision and power, making the most terrifying striker we've ever seen in the sport. I believe he's even more terrifying than Francis because Francis has the brute power, but he doesn't have the technique and precision that Alex does. If Francis was striking like Alex Pereira, then of course, like they shouldn't even let him fight at that point. You know, he'd be so dangerous. But do other things factor like bone density and such? Yeah, probably that factors into the power aspect. The bone density, the rotational force, specifically in that left hook. He's been firing the bow and arrow like his whole life, strengthening those muscles as well. So generally would describe it with just precision and power, but there's other factors that make up the precision and power, you know? So that is what it is. So Alex is just an anomaly in sports. And then we go to Armando Arellano. I apologize with the pronunciation. Hopefully you can clarify on that and I can correct the pronunciation. But for your question, Weasel, who do you think has the best MMA defense in terms of footwork, slipping punches, and takedown defense currently and of all time? No problem, man, and thank you so much for the question. The fighter with the best defense currently, it's difficult to pinpoint to one fighter, but I guess some of the guys off the top of my head would be, now Sean Strickland, of course, has great striking defense. We've seen that against the very best. But again, you can't defend 100% of the strikes, and some of those are going to get through. He doesn't have the power to hold his opponents off, so they're going to be throwing a volley of power punches at him, and some of those are going to hit those openings, like Drick is landing an overhand and Adesanya landing a few shots here and there. His lack of power puts a lot of stress on his defense because he has to rely on it. If he had punching power, I mean, this guy would be destroying so many fighters, but you can't have it all, you know, you got to be balanced somewhat. Then Ilia Topuria, he slips punches well, steps away from shots like he did against Josh Emmett, putting together beautiful counter combinations. And sometimes he can be difficult to jab due to all that head sway. Now, and I think even statistically, Ilia Topuria shockingly has some of the highest striking defensive rates in the entire UFC. 64% significant striking defense is ridiculously impressive, especially with the way this guy fights. He's always in the fire, and he's defending most of the shots that come his way. Alexander Volkanovski has an excellent jab that keeps him away from his opponents. He has a disproportional reach. 72 inches for a 5'6" fighter is mutant-like. Like, that doesn't make any sense. This guy has a 6-foot reach at 5'6". The emphasis is very important in that. That's going to keep him at range. His opponents are going to whiff punches. He has decent footwork, although he has been cut off and dropped or knocked out, right? Diego Lopez was able to land on his linear step, dropping him with that right hand, and then Ilia Topuria knocked him out with a lateral cutoff. Islam Makhachev head kicked him, I believe, on his linear step, or he might have been slightly angling off to his left. Only the absolute very best of the UFC are able to land on this guy. And not that often. 58% striking defensive rate is impressive at the level that he fights at. I mean, this guy's been going up against the best in the world routinely. Like, fighting Max Holloway, Diego Lopez, Ilia Topuria is just a normal day for this guy. The level of competition that Volkanovski has had to come across has been frightening. I mean, look at his competition. Lopez, Ilia, Islam twice. Yair is a good fighter. He fought Holloway 3 times. Korean Zombie at the time was washed. Ortega's, I guess, on Yair's level. Jose Aldo, Chad Mendes. Insane, bro. Of course he's going to get hit. Of course. And then there's Sean O'Malley, there's Umar, there's Jan. Corey's pretty decent with his defense as well. O'Malley's use of reach is amazing, and his footwork is some of the best in the UFC. Very elusive, very quick, excellent with the stutter steps, switching stances, just throws off the angles. Honestly, O'Malley might have like top 5 at least striking defenses in the UFC. Umar's great defensively everywhere. He has great footwork, an excellent pull on punches, angles for his shots decently, good defense. Jan shells up nicely, better than most. Honestly, shelling up for a lot of other fighters tends to be counterproductive, but for Jan, it absolutely works for him. Except when he fights Merab. No one's defense works against Merab. He'll just overwhelm that shield, you know? Now, Corey Sandhagen is athletic, moves around well, has excellent hand-eye coordination, switches stances, taking off angles. Bantamweight is so extraordinary with skill, but Merab is making all these guys seem not as good as they actually are. I mean, honestly, bantamweight might have the most skilled fighters in the entire UFC as a collective. But Merab's dominance is like shutting down that perspective for most. Those are some of the best currently and of all time. GSP, Anderson Silva, Benson Henderson definitely is one of the best. Jose Aldo, and I'll say Dominic Cruz and Demetrius Johnson are some of the best of all time. And then we go to Troy Hartung. Hey Weasel, 2 questions. Do you think the PFL should just diminish at this point? Majority of their best fighters barely even fight now, and it feels like the organization is being artificially kept alive at this point. If the PFL eventually dies out though, that only leaves 3 major MMA organizations left, Rizin, One Championship, and the UFC. I don't agree with them just ceasing to exist. It is a place where fighters are trying to make a living, even if the top guys are being shelved because they just can't compensate lower level guys that just are trying to make a living or trying to make some money. In that aspect, I think PFL should stay around, but it's really bad for their top guys, and I think they should be released. Allow them to go to the UFC. But yeah, it's true. If the PFL dies out, then it's only Rizin, One, and UFC. And I think this ties into your second question. Over the last 15 years, it seems that top-tier MMA is becoming closer and closer to being a monopoly, with the UFC dominating the market. Do you think that's a good thing because that means more of the best will continue to fight each other, or more of a bad thing because the UFC has less motivation to do better in their promotions in order to outperform their few remaining competitors? This is a great question. I think it depends on your perspective. If you prioritize looking out for fighter pay and stuff, then it's not a good thing. As competition creates more opportunities and fighters are able to go to PFL and One and Rizin and compete for contracts, right? Some fighters are going to get paid more at One Championship, and like fighters who are never going to get far in the UFC, let's say they enter with a 2020 contract. Some of those guys are never going to make more than like $100K for a fight. There's so many of them, right? But at One Championship, they could probably make over 100 grand by becoming a champion, which requires less skill to accomplish. So imagine that. Like Impa Kazanage is a perfect example. That guy was making nothing in the UFC, bro. The UFC was not prosperous for him, but he went to PFL, won the tournament, and became a millionaire. The guy did it in only a few fights in PFL. That's an extreme example, but it scales, right? So like at One, he'll probably make 100 or 200 grand to become champion. That's money that these guys would never see in the UFC. So that's why it's really good for some of these like mid-tier fighters. So if that's your perspective, then MMA becoming a monopoly is not a good thing. But the other side of this is prioritizing the fans' entertainment. The UFC becoming a monopoly would be a good thing for that, because all the best fighters are going to be in one place and they all have to fight each other. With multiple organizations, you can have a Francis Ngannou in PFL, and you can have a Tom Aspinall in the UFC, and then you have Ante Dalia in One Championship. Like as an example, you got all these heavyweights around the world not fighting each other. But if the UFC becomes a monopoly, they'll all be in the same organization fighting each other, which is just better for the fans' experience, So it just depends. There are pros and cons to it, and whatever you prioritize, it's going to paint it as good or bad. So it can be conflicting. And then we're going to go to No Scope 70 years ago. Would you rather fight Arturo or Topuria? I'd rather fight Topuria because he got up by Conor McGregor. Conor didn't want anything to do with Arturo, right? That's why he had to correct himself. He's like, oh, wait, hold on. No, Topuria, not Arturo. Conor wanted nothing to do with Arturo, bro. And then we go to ARR. Is Jan Blachowicz the most underrated light heavyweight ever? Yes. He outstruck Adesanya before anyone else beat him on the feet, leveled up late in his career, and gave the new generation of light heavyweights, like Ankalaev and Ulberg, tough fights. Arguably beat both too, most of which he accomplished in his late 30s and even early 40s, when he should have been out of his prime. Matter of fact, he had one of the weirdest career glow-ups, leveling up at 38. Yeah, that's pretty insane. He was almost a decade older than Ankalaev and Ulberg when he fought them, and took them to close decisions. Crazy, yeah. Ankalaev and Ulberg's success only upskilled Jan Blachowicz immensely, honestly. Like, Jan was always known to be a great fighter. I mean, and not only them, he nearly beat Alex Pereira. Some people believe that he should have gotten the nod. It's incredible, dude, because Jan's early UFC career was met with a lot of losses. His debut was a TKO win against Ilia Latifi. That was a great win, dude. Body kick in the first round. But then he lost to Jimmy Manuwa and Corey Anderson. Although good fighters, especially Corey. Corey's underrated too. But 2 decision losses in a row. Then he beat Igor Pokrajic, who wasn't that great, amounting to 2 more losses against Alexander Gustafsson in his prime. So prime Gus is like top 5 light heavyweights ever in terms of like skill and talent. No shame in losing the prime Gus. But then he lost a majority decision to Patrick Cummins. That was the worst loss in his career. So 6 fights in and he was 2-4, but something clicked. He continued with a 4-fight win streak. He submitted Devin Clark, beat Jared Cannonier, avenged his loss to Jimmy Manuwa, which clearly showed that he leveled up at the time, and also Manuwa was declining, and then submitted Nikita Krylov before losing to Thiago Santos by TKO in a fight that he was doing pretty well in, but suddenly and unreasonably rushed Santos. Like, that didn't make any sense. He was doing pretty well from distance and then just threw his chin into Santos' punches. Whatever though, Santos was a good fighter. So losing to prime Thiago Santos was not shameful either. Like, that's a solid opponent to lose to. But then he continued on a 5-fight win streak. So he outdid his previous win streak by knocking out Luke Rockhold, defeating Jacare Souza by a split decision, a very close fight. Knocked out Corey Anderson, so avenged that earlier loss in the first round too. So again, another level up for Jan Blachowicz. Even defeated him more convincingly than Jimmy Manuwa. And Corey's better than Manuwa too. Then he knocked out Dominic Reyes for the belt, beat Adesanya, which is by far the best win of his career. Lost to Teixeira, and honestly, dude, I think he could have beaten Glover with the right game plan. But he was fighting on the back foot and trying to counter when he should have been pressuring Teixeira and try to blockade those openings for takedowns. Then he had sort of a win against Rakic. It was a knee injury. It was a competitive fight before that. Then he had a draw against Ankalaev, split decision loss against Alex, and a unanimous decision loss against Ulberg, which was also very, very close. Jan's had such an impressive career. So I agree. I do believe Jan Blachowicz is the most underrated light heavyweight of all time, for sure. And then with a counter L. Hey Weasel, love the podcast. Thank you so much, man. I have a question. After Magomedov's fight with Joe Pyfer, how do you think he traveled back to the fighter hotel? Do you think he traveled via a bus? Clever, I like it. And then we go to Tyrone Winter. How much would you say regular IQ affects fight IQ? Or are they mostly separate, would you say? Do you think someone with higher IQ, obviously not trying to focus too much on just physical attributes in this case, is more likely to be better at picking things up when it comes to seeing what their opponent does? How much do you think regular IQ takes a toll on how someone picks up fighting? Or is it just the way the body reacts to fighting? Having higher IQ is definitely going to help in some aspects. Now, it will have to be fueled with confidence and bravery, all the sort of traits that makes up a fighter, because most intelligent people would avoid pursuing an MMA career, right? They can use their talents in other places where they don't have to get brain damage. So if the fighter has the traits to fight and is also a highly intelligent person, so for an example, if a fighter excelled at all the components of critical thinking, I think it would help that fighter in analyzing fights. Like, they'll understand their opponents, they'll study their skills. They could precisely pinpoint their opponent's strengths and weaknesses faster than someone who just relies on their coach, right? If the fighter and the coach are great at developing a game plan by analyzing the opponent, it will be significantly more beneficial. I think that's where regular IQ will take effect, is in the preparation for the fight. I define fight IQ with like mid-fight adjustments, tactics, techniques, and stuff. So using that definition, fight IQ is relied on during the fight, of course. But is there a UFC fighter who's both generally intelligent as well as having high fight IQ? The first one that comes to mind is like Shi Ming. Shi Ming might be the smartest on the roster. Rosie Sexton was very smart. Didn't have the best fight IQ. Joe Lozon seems like a pretty smart guy, but man, does he not fight like it. It's actually quite interesting how that works. Georges St. Pierre, he combines general IQ and fight IQ at a very high level. I've heard Damian Maia was actually pretty smart, but I didn't really listen to many of his interviews. So those are some of the fighters that come to mind. But then your question about, does regular IQ take a toll on someone picking up fighting? Yeah, of course. Many smart people understand the risks of combat sports, so they choose another path where their high IQ would be more productive or beneficial, or they could do both like Shi Ming. She's a doctor and a UFC fighter. So great question, man. And then we go to Felipe Arajo. What do you think an MMA promotion would need to do in order to really compete with the UFC? Which mistakes do you think other promotions like Bellator, PFL, Strikeforce did, and how would you fix it? Like, the PFL fumbled their entire promotion, far worse than Bellator's and Strikeforce's. Strikeforce is actually quite successful. They had great talent. Many of their fighters became UFC champions. But the PFL made the most detrimental promotional business move I've ever seen. That contract that they gave to Francis Ngannou was a decision that every other MMA organization is going to learn from to never replicate, although you think they would already be mindful of that. Signing one fighter nearly crumbled their entire promotion. At least that's what it seemed like. And that had a rippling effect to all of the other fighters. They couldn't get any fights, they were shelved because of them signing one specific fighter. But there is an issue that both Bellator and the PFL shared, is that they presented themselves as like a knockoff UFC brand. They fight in a cage. The whole arena is shaped very similar to the UFC's, and there has to be like a different atmosphere to it, you know? Like Ryzen or Pride, right? It feels like you're in a whole different world when you watch their fights. Add something to create a new experience for the fans. Don't try to mimic what the UFC's doing. It's never going to work. The only reason why Strikeforce made it as far as it did was because the UFC wasn't as popular as it became later. The UFC was trending. If Strikeforce tried to formulate their organization in the mid-2010s, they would have become another Bellator. Even with the great amount of talent that they had, no one has ever exceeded the stardom that is the UFC brand, except sort of Conor McGregor, right? So the talent in Strikeforce, Bellator, and the PFL really aren't going to change anything. The reason why Pride was temporarily able to surpass the UFC was because of how early it was in MMA. That was the late 90s and early 2000s. Zuffa just acquired the UFC in 2001. Pride was already running pretty strongly at that time, and they had some of the best heavyweights in the world. The heavyweights then were definitely a spectacle. And you have to think like Conor McGregor and BJ Penn and some of these legends from the UFC that made the lighter fighters popular. It started with BJ Penn. He drew an interest to the lightweight division. If it wasn't for him, lightweight would have been dormant for a long time. Probably until they acquired WEC. And then Conor McGregor brought light to the featherweight division, then carried that stardom at lightweight as well. And the heavyweights just seemingly weren't as popular afterward. But Pride was special. The only organization to ever surpass the UFC. And I think those days are over. I don't think the UFC will ever get surpassed again. At this point, it seems self-sufficient enough where they don't have to do much. And Felipe Araújo, great question, man. And then we go to Mindstorm. How would Merab do against the featherweight top 15? Keep up the great content. Thank you so much, man. So Merab versus Giga Chikadze. I would say Merab easily beats him. He beats Dan Ige, but I think it'd be a tough fight. He beats Onama, beats Garcia, beats Pitbull, beats Silva, but rather tough. Beats Zalal in another tough fight. I think he beats Emmett, who is seemingly on a decline. He overwhelms Ortega. I think he loses to Arnold Allen. There's too much of a size difference there. And Allen's good everywhere. He has 5-round cardio. He loses to Sterling. I've always thought that too. Even at bantamweight, I thought Sterling was the kryptonite to Merab's style. He loses to Lerone Murphy. Beats Yair. Great stylistic matchup for Merab. Loses to Lopez. Loses to Movsar. And then loses to Volkanovski. Weight classes matter for a reason, and Merab is not a big bantamweight. And then we go to Elibal Toldano. Dream matchups. Who wins and how? Hamza versus Prime Yoel. I'll go Hamza by a decision. Jan versus Prime Dillashaw. I'll go with Jan by a decision as well. In an incredibly skilled fight. And then Topuria versus Prime Aldo. I'll go with Topuria by third round knockout as Aldo starts to gas against that pressure. But Aldo had an effective style against him. And then we go to Hazy Bubble. Pick one fighter from your weight class that you would want to fight. You get one training camp. How about none of them? I think I would be a lightweight. Okay, if I have to pick, you know what? I'd fight Ilia Topuria and then just tap out within a second of the fight. Technically, I fought Ilia and he didn't land a single punch. No, but if you're going to lose to a UFC fighter, might as well lose to the very best, right? And then we're going to swish. Jonathan Haggerty, the current 145-pound kickboxing and former 2-division Muay Thai world champion, has expressed a lot of interest in competing in MMA. Let's say if we were to give him Alex Pereira level takedown defense. I thought you were going to say give him Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira level takedown defense. How do you think he does against the current rankings in the UFC's featherweight division? I think his striking would translate pretty well, especially giving him some time to properly train for MMA, right? But Alex takedown defense is not the highest level, especially because he's fighting at featherweight. Like trying to defend Volkanovski's takedowns is going to be quite difficult when it's mixed up with very high level striking. Or if he fights Movsar, Lopez, Sterling, dude, Sterling would be such a nightmare. Arnold Allen's well-rounded. Those fights would probably be way too difficult for him. I do not foresee him beating those guys, even with Alex level takedown defense. But dude, imagine him fighting Giga Chikadze, or William Gomes, or Melsik Bagdasaryan, Stephen Wynn, Yair Rodriguez, bro. Those would be such exciting fights, man. But of course, that's with the hypothetical of him somehow getting Alex level takedown defense. Honestly, he could even surpass Alex's takedown defense. He's only 28. Alex came to the UFC in like his mid-30s. So let's say Haggerty takes some regional MMA fights, and then let's say after a year of performances, he goes to the Contender Series just like Artem Vakhitov did, enters the UFC, fights some strikers. You know, they're going to probably manufacture his rise intelligently before giving him a grappler. So he could fight like William Gomes and Melsik Bagdasaryan, various different strikers before they give him like Morgan Charrier, a good striker who's gonna shoot some takedowns. And if he gets past him, then he can fight like Giga Chikadze, who's a favorable stylistic matchup. Afterward, he fights Patricio Pitbull. Let's say he knocks him out. They could give him like Yair Rodriguez or something like that, you know. Haggerty's rise can actually be pretty interesting, but it's impossible to know. It's of course going to be purely speculative until his takedown defense gets tested. But man, I cannot wait until his MMA fight. That's going to be really interesting. And speaking of Artem Vakhitov, the guy went back to kickboxing and then lost to Rico Verhoeven. It's such a shame that the UFC didn't offer him enough. I mean, we're talking about one of the best light heavyweight kickboxers in the world. The sort of talent that we want to see in that division. But we have guys to substitute that great talent like Junior Tafa and Ibo Aslan and Hidalgo Balato and Rafael Cerqueira, Brenson Ribeiro. Why would they not sign Artem Vakhitov, bro? But we're just getting contender series slop, bloating these divisions. Light heavyweight and heavyweight have such scarcity of talent. It's depressing. Bro, Alex and Jan are probably going to retire soon. Right? They're not going to fight for that much longer. So the division will be left with Ankalaev, Jiri, Ulberg, Roundtree, all great fighters, right? I think Osman will climb to the top, so he'd probably be there as well. I think he's somewhere around their caliber. But then you have Hill, Reyes, Rakic needs some wins. You got Volkan, Bogdan's like, okay. Walker, Krylov, Menefield, Mingyang. Bro, this division is cooked. Them not signing Artem Vakhitov annoyed me so much, bro. They'd rather just sign the Contender Series slop over actual talent. Now, that's not to disrespect all the Contender Series guys, because some became champions, and there are definitely very good fighters from the Contender Series, but not most of them, man. A lot of them are in and out the UFC. They debut, they get like 3 fights in, and they get cut. It happens to a lot of them. And then with King Louis, who do you think wins these hypothetical matchups at 205? Pereira versus Ulberg. Pereira. Ulberg versus Jiri. Jiri. Roundtree versus Ankalaev. Ankalaev. Hill versus Reyes. Hill. Then with Mags. Hey Weasel, I have 2 questions for you. In your opinion, who is the best fighter in the history of each division? Meaning the fighter that would dominate in any era that could beat anyone. And who is the greatest fighter in the history of each division? Meaning the fighter that personified the division and that had the greatest run, the most historical one, but may not necessarily be the best. Love your content for many years now. Greetings from France. Thank you so much, man, and shout out to France. Yes, so the best fighter in each division and the greatest, which are 2 different categories. Best is who's the most skilled, greatest is who's the most accomplished. And sometimes the greatest is not the best. It could seem confusing, but when you really start thinking about who are the most skilled and who are the most accomplished, you tend to find that they're not the same fighters. Like the featherweight division. Ilia Topuria is the best featherweight of all time. He's the most skilled, but he's certainly not the greatest. He hasn't done enough. He won the belt, defended it once, and bounced. So you can't call him the greatest featherweight of all time. But starting with the heavyweight division, I would say the best heavyweight, in my opinion, I could be wrong, I think it's Francis Ngannou. I think he would beat every heavyweight champion in history, including Tom Aspinall. Now, it's close. It's not a dominant win or anything like that. I wouldn't be super confident, but I would pick him to beat Tom. But the greatest heavyweight of all time would be Stipe Miocic. Light heavyweight, the best and the greatest is John Jones. Middleweight, the best, in my opinion, is Hamza Chimaev. I think he beats every middleweight champion in history. But the greatest is, of course, Anderson Silva. Welterweight, I believe the best and the greatest are GSP. Usman's close, though, as number 2 for both. I think Usman is the second greatest and the second best welterweight of all time. Lightweight, I think the best is Khabib, and I think the greatest is Islam. But they could be interchangeable. Some people would switch them. Featherweight, the best is Ilia Topuria, and the greatest is Alexander Volkanovski. Bantamweight, the greatest and the best is Merab. And at flyweight, the best I think is Pantoja, and the greatest I believe is DJ. And then women's bantamweight, best and greatest is Nunes. Flyweight, best and greatest is Shevchenko. And strawweight, best and greatest are Weili. They're going to Dre Johnson. I genuinely believe Alexander Gustafsson just happened to have his prime at the same time as 3 of the best ever, Jones, DC, and Rumble. And in any other era, he'd be a longtime champ at 205. I even believe he beats anyone at 205 today. Do you agree? Yes. I think he beats every 205er today. Top tier wrestling skills, top tier striker, tall and long, swift combinations, extremely skilled, durable as well. Yeah, I gotta say Gustafsson would beat every 205er today. I mean, this is the same guy who was wrestling with Jones and DC. He's roughly at that level with wrestling. So he's the same guy who put Jan Blachowicz in a wrestling clinic. So I believe so. I think he would be all of them. He's a better striker than most, and he's a better wrestler than most. Then we go to Loki Doc. Do you think Islam is being underrated in the JDM fight? It could have a reversal effect because in the beginning, it was JDM who was being underrated, but perhaps with everybody jumping on that bandwagon, it is causing Islam to now be underrated. The weight has been tipped the other way, so I don't think so. I think JDM is actually still the one who's more underrated than Islam, considering that Islam is a big favorite, and I think most believe that he's just going to run right through JDM, so I think JDM is still the one who's underrated. And that is the end of the episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to give the video a like, subscribe with the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.